like I said, we are in this time where we've got this interdisciplinary situation of creativity happening both in this room and in reality. Like, we're at the steaming hot nexus of all of the information that's ever existed. And when you're in that sort of place of Kierkegaardian paralysis analysis, where you have all of the information and philosophy and triviality and bullshit and profundity at your fingertips, that makes it difficult to decide what you want to do with your time. And I fight that battle every single day in my creative life. And I know all of you do as well. And I think we all have unique, interesting ways of overcoming that and being challenged by that. But Luke, you and I just spoke the other day, and I think you have one of the most interesting paths as far as that's concerned. So to make it a little more needlepoint, how did you start your practice of self-discovery, biohacking, all of these things? Like, I'll let you tell the story, because you'll tell it better than me. You'll set the stage much more.
I was actually sitting here, and by the way, thank you to the last panel. That was amazing stuff. Really, wasn't that? I was like sitting back there going, God, these people are being. I hate the word authentic because it's so generic, but I was like, God, these people are fucking real. I get to be real tonight. That's great. It's not like, oh, we're the self-help panel. But what I was wondering, watching the panel, which was true for myself, is I was looking at each person going like, what was the catalyst for them to really want to dive deep and work on themselves to the degree that obviously they have, and I'm assuming the same is true for us. For me, it was just abject shame, trauma, despair, drug addiction, alcoholism.
That's it?
Just had a totally fucked life, you know what I mean? I mean, really. I mean, you know, people have worse childhoods and stuff. Every man's burden is the heaviest, as Bob Marley said. But for me, it was just like I needed answers fast. And I also had some innate sense that there was some sort of higher calling or a higher power, something like someone said earlier, just like, I knew there was something more to life than what I had, but really it was just pain. Like, that's the short answer, is like, I need answers. And so 21 years ago, I started just really diving into anything and everything that could possibly bring you peace of mind, well-being, happiness, health, and all that. And I sort of just keep going. But then at a certain point, it sort of, once I had a little bit of success with that, then it sort of switched to where the motive wasn't, the necessity wasn't because of pain. It was because, like, wow, God, that feels really good to feel good. And then, like, what upper thresholds of actually feeling okay in my skin can I hit? And that's the motivation now, is like, wow, this is amazing. What's next? What's next? What's next? You know?
Yes. And I mean, that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're trying to not only set out on that path of self-exploration and authenticity, but also hopefully do it in a way that is ontologically satisfying and satisfying that deep held persistent hunger that we all have to try to find some sort of existential truth, like with what we're going through, and merging that, for example, your living and that calling doesn't always work. It's pretty difficult to do that. But John, that makes me think of you, because I know you've been an artist forever, but mindfulness and spirituality, to use an unbelievably loaded term, like, eventually came into that practice. And I think you have an unbelievably fascinating story about how that happened.
Well, I call myself an accidental meditator. I was sure that intellectual analysis was going to solve all the problems. And so I set out to write an artificial intelligence program that would do creative work, that would be an artist. And technologically, it was kind of impossible. But at the same time, I thought, I make drawings and I think that I do that, so how do I do it? And so I turned all my attention into my own creative source to try and examine it. And so that was the wrong question, but the right answer, because it didn't get me an artificial intelligence. It got me something much deeper. And all of a sudden, sitting in the studio, improvising with a pencil and watching what emerged became the most fantastic story that I could possibly imagine. And to this day, every day when I sit, something new comes up. And sometimes it's something that happened to me in the past that needs to be dealt with, and sometimes it's something that's happening right now that needs to be dealt with, and sometimes it's much, much deeper. If we're open to what's arising in our daily practice and be present in our daily time, that wisdom comes.
Yeah, yeah. Can you please share your empty space epiphany? Because I really love that, because I think that's one of those things that's kind of, stained throughout Eastern thought, this concept of emptiness, or somehow coming into contact with like the empty mind or something. And, I think we mistakenly equate that with just like blackness or inertness, or something like that. But I think you had a really, really interesting way of interpreting that.
Yeah, the question really was I was making drawings, and was I just making things up? Like, was there really something being transmitted either from deep within my own intuition or from some outside source? It didn't really matter, but was something channeling through me or not? And I was making these drawings that were cyclical. They were cycles, and I was making up all these stories about them. This is Carl Jung's mandalas, and this is Philip K. Dick's phylogons that were moving from moment to moment, and this is a consciousness study, and I had all this kind of a story about it, and none of it was ever ending or ever complete. And then maybe it took a year and a half of making these drawings, and I make the drawings improvisationally, and I get into persistent patterns, and I just let them run and let them run. And then one day it occurs to me, maybe it's not this cycle, this circular form that I'm drawing, but the space in the middle. It was kind of an open space in the middle. That's really where it's at. And so as soon as my thinking started to reverse, the figure in the ground of the drawing started to reverse, I started to see in the center coming these profiles, these pictures of a person's profile, and I realized it's not the stuff that surrounds the drawing. That's the person. It's like the person is not the stuff that surrounds us, that the self is just constructed that way, that there's really nothing there but the decisions we make every day and the things we do every day.
Yeah. And oh my God, does that ripple throughout reality, right? Because you hear all of these anecdotal things like, reality is matter is mostly empty space. Like, I was going off on one of my simulation theory flights of fancy the other day, and I was watching this video, and this is like hard science. This isn't just like woo-woo bullshit. Like, there are these, I can't remember the exact organization, but they're a group of scientists working on something called emergence theory, I want to say.
Yeah, sure.
And it's essentially based off the idea that there is like this transcendental object kind of beaming what we see reality down into our, sensory realm, like similar to if you were holding up like a tetrahedron, like a three-dimensional object, and it was casting a shadow down on the ground. Like, we are that for some higher dimensional, like transcendental object, and the ground floor of our reality is like the empty space in like between the lines of that like tetrahedronic shape or whatever. Also, I don't want to make this like a calling on people. So if anybody, Yoshino, Erica, Jen, if this inspires anything in you, like, please just speak up, because I think I love when it just flows freely. But for now, I'll kick it to you, Yoshino, because I know you also have like a really unique approach to meditation and self-discovery that we haven't really touched on yet. And I'll let you take it from there.
Oh yeah, that definitely works.
Baritone.
Very white. Meditation. I think a lot of the meditation self-discovery stuff came from when I first got into photography. When I first got into photography, I was kind of lying to myself about the subject matter in which I wanted to document, or the subject matter in which I was shooting. I think it was a lot of because of just, I guess, my certain expectations I had of myself, and then, like directly getting out of college, and you kind of want to have some sort of, you feel like you want to have some sort of calling, but you're not. I wasn't as honest about it. And then I started Artists Decoded, the podcast, and I got to interview people like John, for instance, talking about just, just like the process and understanding who you are as an artist and who you are more so as a person. But the meditative practice, I think, it's informed by the art and understanding like what and who I am as a person. But also a lot of it comes from like meditation for me a lot of the times is I find through boxing sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you're like completely in the moment and you have to be in the moment. And if you're not in the moment, because I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for like 8 years, and then boxing is more recent, like a year and a half. But it really kind of helped me with understanding how to be relentless with your approach to just living, and then also just being, present in the moment.
Yeah. With anything physical, where you're pushing yourself and you're constantly adapting at a moment's notice, and Luke, this will get right into your wheelhouse again, and please, ladies, chime in. Please chime in if this inspires anything. After that initial period of figuring out where you start to gain an expertise, you get out of that busy brainwave state of like beta, fast-moving brainwaves that we're all in, walking around, navigating through life, and you're eventually able to get into a flow state, which is a slower moving brainwave, which is essentially on the road toward meditation. It's like doing an active real-time meditation where you're just responding in real time. Boxing is like this. Any sport can be like this. Obviously, you hear athletes at the peak of their performance talking about this exact thing. Ladies, does this spark anything for you? I really want to get you guys in here.
Yeah, I was just thinking, moving through life with grace and ease in an artful way is a meditation practice in itself. And someone once said to me, this was a doctor of mine, I have a pretty structured meditation practice, and he said, all of that meditation, all of that yoga is so good, but think of it like it could be like smoking a cigarette. It's that quick fix. You have to kind of shift that mindset to move through every moment of every day, all the stressful work triggers, and take it to that place of working or living in that flow. And once he said that to me, I was like, yeah, how can I just extend my meditation practice that happens in the morning for 20 minutes all day long with my eyes open and talking at the same time?
So I think that gets into too, like defining what meditation is, because I think we have a lot of weird preconceived notions about like what the goal of meditation is. Like why would you, and this is a question to everybody, why would you want to take a meditative mindset into your everyday? Like what does that do for you? What does that mean for you?
Well, it allows you to not be overcome by your thoughts and emotions. For me, it's like I'm walking around Manhattan and someone's maybe steps in my way, and if I wasn't a meditator, I'd be like, I want to fucking kill that person. They're in my way.
Right.
They're doing it to me. I mean, that's just the animal reaction. But having spent some time in meditation, like that thought might still come, but there's a gap of separation between that thought and any emotional energy. It's just like, a little threat, and you just move on and it's just gone. Where many years ago I used to get trapped by every thought and every emotion, so it's like, and I love what you said too, it's more of like a living prayer or a living conscious contact. Someone once told me when I first started praying, they said, dude, it's not going to work because you have like this special set aside time for prayer, and you're going to have a special set aside God that's only there in emergencies, like Santa Claus God, and that shit doesn't work. He said to me, you have to develop a living God. And I was like, that shit floored me. Something that you take with all the time. So to me, to put the effort into the dedicated times for meditation and prayer is just so, actually the purpose is so that I can take it out into the world and operate from my highest self rather than from my instincts and all of that stuff.
Yeah. It's like, I love the ability that everybody can gain to like take, like in your instance, big Luke watching small Luke. Like watching small Luke get pissed off and being like, and then big Luke can go, oh, little Luke is upset.
Well,
that's
so true,
okay,
because
yeah.
I used to demonize the ego as like, it was like this sin part of me, and I'm really grateful that I have an ego, because it's what is trying to keep me alive, but if I don't outsmart it, then it takes over, and it's actually very dumb. It's cunning, but it's dumb. It makes really bad decisions. You know what I mean? So I don't fight it anymore. I just I'm friends with it, and I like that. My teacher, not my teacher, but a teacher, David Hawkins, who I adopted as my teacher, he used to talk about riding around in the car with his ego, and when someone would threaten him in the car and his ego would want to rise up, he'd just be like, oh, good job, ego. You know, it's like making friends with it rather than trying to get rid of it or fight it. It's just like temper it through that awareness.
Yeah, and you need that thing, right? Like you said, it keeps you alive. Like
dude, you wouldn't take a shower in the morning.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like,
We literally wouldn't be here because that ego-based anxiety that our ancestors had kept them off the stupid path where people died. And they were like, I don't know, man, I don't like this path. And they were all in their head running scripts about the potential dangers, and that actually helped them avoid potential dangers. But now, as important as that inheritance was, it's an obstacle most of the time now, and telling it to shut up can be very difficult. You look so ready, Jen. You look so ready.
I know, I've been quiet.
It's okay.
So I guess my journey was really kind of thrust upon me. I say that it was like forced introspection. And I was 16 years old when basically I was diagnosed with depression. I was living a really unhealthy and unsupportive life. And my parents actually pulled me out of school and put me through a wilderness immersion and a therapeutic boarding school. And really? Oh my God.
We'll talk later.
What? Okay.
Whoa.
Cool. Okay.
do the graduates call themselves survivors now?
Of which part?
Go on.
Okay, cool. So anyway, through that whole experience, I went through so much. It was the most painful and most beautiful, most vulnerable, most authentic and scary thing of my life. But I also cultivated this desire to basically become my own healer. And I had this sort of idea that I could develop habits, that I could integrate my mind and my body and do things every day, that I could learn practices that would make me feel more balanced and more whole and more happy on a consistent basis. So once I started studying, I studied yoga, I studied meditation. It was like I opened Pandora's box and realized that everything is really all interconnected. You know, it's all, you just want to get to this space. It's about how you get there. So for some people, it's the Vipassana meditation. For some people, it's painting, or it could be really anything, boxing. It's just how you get to that space, that neutral space. And I think that meditation, it's different every day. Sometimes you're going to sit and it's going to be quiet and you're going to be able to go, zone in and get to a clarified vision. And some days you're going to sit and you're going to keep thinking about what's for lunch. Or some days you're going to sit and you're going to feel a tightness in your heart. It's going to be different every day. And I think the meditation is just being with what is and having that be okay.
Yeah. And now you're getting into a part of the conversation I was really hoping we would get to, is what I like to call subjective sciences, because we are not raised with the ability to do this kind of exploration. It's not like everything we learn until we hit adulthood and gain the desire for ourselves is an outward-facing, achievement-based skill. Get this job, get this degree, get this salary, get this. And yet we're walking around as a subjective being with like a rich inner world that we have no idea how to explore. We don't know what it means. Like, we're looking to all of these, books from thousands of years ago, wrapped in the cultural context of that time that doesn't make sense to us anymore. So eventually we've got to, that angst and that sort of existential longing has to build into the desire to fucking do something. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just going to try this. And then often when you topple that first domino, then the exploration really starts, and you start doing exactly what you mentioned. So was there a catalyst? I mean, we've kind of talked about catalysts, like what led each of you to start down that path of subjective exploration. But what was the, if there was a thing for you or something you can point to, any of you, do it.
I don't think I had that moment or that, that one specific memory that made me make this shift. But I always led, personally and professionally from my head. Did this totally make sense? Did this financially make sense? How is this going to set me up for the future? And I think, it's exhausting. It's like totally exhausting, and having that, talk in the back of my mind, it hasn't really totally gone away, and I don't know if it ever actually will.
I don't think it will.
But leading,
not to be pessimistic, I think it's just part of the human condition.
but truly making decisions, like thoughtful decisions with my heart, has shifted my work. Really changed my relationship with my husband. I get to really choose to do things that totally bring me joy, and as cheesy as that sounds, when it's coming from the heart, the work is just oozing out of me. There's no forcefulness to it. It's that moment that I can catch myself in that negative thought or that negative talk is when I start going. I can reel myself back in and keep down that path of just leading from my heart. And sometimes I can catch myself in those moments, and other times I need a teacher, a therapist, a friend to remind me to just keep going.
And I think that people feel like they need to have it all figured out, right? Like you go to high school and then you go to college and you're majoring in something and you're supposed to know. And for me, when I was graduating, I studied religion and philosophy. It's what, big question mark, what are you going to do with that? But, I wanted to do a million things. I wanted to be a naturopathic doctor. I wanted to be an acupuncturist. I wanted to study Ayurveda. I wanted to take on the whole holistic healing world. And I think the most important thing was just taking one step. And then that leads to another step. And you just keep going and it keeps unfolding. It's not like you need to know it all right now, or, you're not going to, once you take that first step, it's going to lead to something that you need to do, and the other things are going to kind of fall away, and it's just going to be organic like that. So.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think one of the only aspects of this I feel like we haven't even touched on at all that is an absolute prerequisite for having any kind of successful path or practice is a community. And I wasn't, by the way, before when I was talking about, tapping ancient texts or whatever for inspiration, I'm not trying to say that pejoratively, these things are useless now, but I do think they require recontextualization. But one of my favorite things about Buddhism that just lays everything out so beautifully is what's usually called the triple gem, or the three gems of Buddhism. And it's the Dharma, the Sangha, or Satsang, and the Dharma, did I say Dharma? Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So the Sangha, which is it's a core part of it, is the community. It's a space for you to go to practice, reinforce you, help you, guide you, and that's what we're missing. Luckily we have stuff like this now, which is fantastic and beautiful, and but it's not. This isn't going to happen tomorrow. This isn't. You can't come back here tomorrow for another one of these and start applying these things. So do you guys have communities? Do you have other people that nudge you down the path or help you? Or are you feeling like you need that?
In my experience, I was lucky enough to be cursed with being a junkie. And so when that happens and you want to stop, you have to go to special groups for that, And
True.
I've felt very fortunate that I've had that support, whereas you might have someone that just has a spiritual discontent and is unhappy or depressed or has other problems that aren't necessarily manifested as a very specific addiction. And I always think, where do they go? There are Course in Miracles groups and things like that here and there, but there aren't really widespread emotional and mental recovery groups. It's group therapy and stuff like that. So I've been very fortunate that I've found places that I belong because I fit in a very narrow category of issues, and then find that I have more issues.
Right.
You have to go to more of them. Yeah, so that's been my path.
Yeah.
When I lived here in Manhattan, and in the art world, I was spending time in the gallery and going to openings, and there was an art community, and there's lots of events, and so it's a place that you can find a strong community. And having started a family and moved more upstate, it became more isolated, and that's also the time that I got much more deeply into introspective work. And so there were a couple of problems. One is that there's not as big a community even here for people who are both creative and contemplative. And the other is that up there's really not a lot of people, so.
Yeah.
And as many ways that technology isolates us and divides us and puts us in our own attention zones, it also connects us in lots of ways. And so around the publication of Drawing Your Own Path, I started a Facebook group, of course, and that sort of thing. And we have what I call a drawing bee, and it takes place on Tuesday nights, and it takes place via a conferencing software called Zoom, and we hold a space open for creativity. And I encourage people of any creative interest at any creative level to come in, and people come in and we draw together. And of course it's very nice that no one has to see what you're drawing, so a lot of the social convention and worries about what you're making goes away. And no one has to leave their home or their studio, and so that actually is taking off because people have an interest and a need in it, and it's a way to connect with the few people who share the interest sort of all over the world. And we have people come in from Australia, and we have people coming from Europe, and so it's actually kind of a new level of Sangha, I think, that's going on.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, said the next Buddha will be the Sangha. And this is, I think, the shades of it forming, is that we're interconnect, and there's politics and there's a level of dialogue that goes on in the mass media, but there's an underlying level of interconnection that's going on through social media and through these networking environments where the world is sort of reconfiguring itself, and that makes me very positive.
Yeah, and again, you know, like there are these really tantalizing overlaps. Like a brain is a network. The internet is a network. When you look at images of deep space, what looks to the naked eye like, oh, this is just like black nothingness. If you look at it through infrared, it looks like a dendritic neuronal shape. It looks exactly like a brain. Like the known universe looks just like a brain under the right frequency. So I feel like these are really interesting breadcrumbs to follow, and it's very tempting, at least for me, to draw certain conclusions from those connotations. But so actually I wanted to kick this down to you too, Yoshino, because we did an event not dissimilar from this in LA.
Yeah.
And you've got a beautiful little creative community as well, man, that I'd love to hear you rap about.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that artistic community stuff came from me. Well, it first came from my understanding of who I was as a person and who I am as an artist, and being emotionally vulnerable, which, you know, is or emotionally intelligent, but being emotionally vulnerable with myself and understanding like why I want to do things and what I want to contribute to. So naturally, I mean, I started the podcast Artists Decoded, and I interview all kinds of different artists, from musicians, photographers, filmmakers, and painters. I'm just trying to find like a common thread that ties everyone together, you know. Martial artists, I've interviewed a couple martial artists as well. And just from that understanding, the community kind of built naturally, which led me to me and my business partner Justin Hopkins, who's a painter and a musician, composer, to building No Wave, which is, we started in December, and it's just this kind of natural, like organic, artistic communal experience in Los Angeles. But I mean, that all happened through process, you know. It's like you do one thing and you throw something out there, and then hopefully, you know, you manifest what you throw out there into the world. But that also all comes from an understanding of who you are and why you're doing the things, you know. And I think in, like, you know, in big cities like Los Angeles and New York, or whatever city, that large city, and when there's a large community and there's a lot of noise, you have to kind of sift through that noise and see, who am I, you know, and really examine that, kind of like gutturally take that out of your spirit and examine. So, I mean, I've always liked, you know, community and contributing, but yeah, I think that's just where it came from for me.
You have the added benefit of being a dripping with talent artist that tends to be kind of a magnetic.
Dripping
it
right
tends
here.
to be a little. What's that?
I said literally dripping right here.
Oh yeah. That's
Yeah.
I
That's
didn't even
Vaseline.
Connect that, but yeah, that tends to be a bit of a magnet for
I was
creative
looking
communities.
through everyone's photos, and I was like, Man, people are gonna think I'm fucking weird or something.
No, I love it, man.
Yeah, I kind of like that too.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of this. I'm not sure if we've really talked directly about being emotionally intelligent, but I feel like that's kind of a difficult conversation to have without resorting to platitudes. But what I do think is an extremely important part of all of these things we're talking about, especially once the communal aspect of it starts to take shape. Like you do have a community you work with or do spiritual, practice with or exploration with, or like a podcast network, whatever the case may be. It all boils down to that interpersonal relationship, empathy, being able to understand what everybody in the scenario wants, expects, needs, isn't getting. So when we're talking about creativity, communities, all of these things, I always find it to be very similar to romantic relationships. Like I grew up playing in a band, and it was always like, everybody, it's like something very like, hey, I have this riff. Here's this riff I'm going to play for you guys. And you can like feel the range of emotions in the room. Like this guy likes it. This guy doesn't like it. And you somehow have to find that common ground, right? You somehow have to like find that common ground and turn it into something productive. Like transmute that dissonance into like a nice 5-part harmony or whatever the key is. And I'm sure all of you have examples of times you've had to do that. And like, is there a way you can generalize it? Because we've obviously got a ton of people in the crowd. Is there a way you can generalize how you foster that positive creative vibe?
I think like in my Reiki practice, for example, it's being able to take the temperature of the room and then from there kind of like knowing how to respond and how to move forward. But before even knowing how to take the temperature of the room, it's really, I guess, working on my communication with myself and then how I communicate with others in order to kind of, get a sense of where everybody's at. Do they like the music? Do they not like the music? So yeah, it's a piece of emotional intelligence, a small piece, but just getting a sense of how you can better connect with other people and being able to hold space for them simply.
Yeah. And I think one of the really, really difficult parts of discussing this is for some people it comes fairly naturally. Like if you believe some of the more, kinds of psychological, like Myers-Briggs type thing, you may just naturally be high in that personality type. You might be an expressive personality type that has an easy time relating to other people. You might be super left-brained and really analytical and just not understand that you're coming off like a dick, And for those people, like I think that's where there's a lot of nuance and growth that's possible, but also really difficult to communicate effectively. Does anybody feel like they struggle in that department? Like, do they want to like put themselves up on the cross on this one?
On the Myers-Briggs and all that,
Yeah.
I have like super high empathy on every personality test. But on the opposite end of the spectrum of someone who's very analytical and intellectually driven, I've had a hard time with boundaries because I'm like so open and so in tune with everyone. It's almost like the opposite struggle is having
Me too.
being more reserved and having a bit more discernment in terms of like how I interact with people because I'm just so much that way. So that's
everybody wants to hear about my moles.
That's
Like, hey man, nice to meet you. I have this mole.
Yeah, and just like
oversharing
and having
immediately.
a healthy sense of intimacy and openness with people based on how well you actually know them and all that. Yeah.
You're not going to be everything to everyone, Sometimes I'll be teaching a workshop or a yoga class and I can sense that people aren't on my vibe. They're just not getting what I'm doing. So I have to decide quickly, am I going to change? How am I going to handle this? And sometimes you just have to keep doing what you're doing and know that the people who aren't resonating with it, that's, it's all good. And you just have to keep doing what's authentic for you and tuning into your heart, your emotional center. It's hard to get out of your head in that moment and to sense kind of what is the right way to be. But I think if you're trying to continuously please everyone, and be everything for everyone, then you're gonna have a really hard time doing that because you can't meet everyone where they're at.
Yeah. So I guess to just, I know we got to wrap up here, but to like dig like one final little pickaxe into this subject, do you think that this is something that you should play to your strengths on? Should you just be like, look, I'm an ENFP, to use like Myers-Briggs terminology. That's what I'm good at. Whatever. I'm just going to lean into that. Or should you be trying to like, half-assedly work on those lacking parts of your personality? What do you guys
Well, I think it's funny the order that this talk's actually gone in, because it's good to end up here, because first the necessity of the mindfulness and meditation, the inner work, comes from wherever it comes from for each one of us. But doing that work, I think, gives you the ability to really be present. Like doing Kundalini yoga for years has made me breathe when I'm sitting next to someone. Like whenever you guys talk, I'm sitting here like literally breathing and just being totally with you, And so the practices that we do, I think, enable us to kind of access that emotional intelligence. And then it's just a matter of sort of fine-tuning it so that it's appropriate in each situation.
Yeah. All right. I think that's our time, guys. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Greatly appreciate it.